Welcome to another episode of Hope for Your Life, where we know that life is tough, but we believe there is hope. And we want to talk about that hope and really just grasp that hope for our lives. I'm glad you joined today because we're continuing our topic, turning your failure into fuel. Turning your failure into fuel. Of course, we're breaking this up into several episodes, this talk about failure. How do we manage failure? And in the last episode, the point that we wanted you to get, the point that I really wanted to stay in your head is do not blow the situation out of proportion. When you make a mistake, when you have a failure, don't exaggerate the situation so that it just takes over your thoughts. You're living, you're breathing, you have another opportunity to make better decisions. So go back and review that episode. Today, we want to get into something else. I want to share one other point today about how we turn our failures into fuel. All right. So here it is. Here's my number one point that I want you to get today. Recognize, but don't internalize your failures. Let me say that again. Recognize, but don't internalize your failures. Now, why is it important to recognize your failures? Well, we know this, everybody knows this, but it deserves repeating, right? Some things just can't be overstated. The main task in recovering from a failure is learning, right? Growth. You want to come away from that experience having learned something and being able to improve from that situation, right? That's the main goal when you're trying to recover from a failure or a fall or a mistake, right? And we cannot grow if we do not recognize our failure. If we don't acknowledge that mistake, we can't grow from it, right? So we want to make sure that we recognize so that we can improve, so that we can say, you know what, I didn't make a good decision here. Here's how I can make a better decision, right? If you don't say, this is how I messed up, you won't say, here's how I can do better, right? We want to learn. We want to grow from it. But here's another reason why it's important to recognize or acknowledge your error or your mistake or your failures. Many times, I'd say most often when we make a failure, especially a big failure, we have the sense that we've lost control. It feels like we've lost control. And when we acknowledge or recognize our failure, take responsibility for our failure, it's a way of regaining or reclaiming control of our decision making and ultimately, eventually, reclaiming control of our situation, right? So when you say that person made me say that, or that person, if they didn't say that, I wouldn't have reacted that way. Who are you giving control of your decision making? Someone else. You're giving someone else ownership of your decision making, right? But when you say, you know what, I overreacted, I should have listened, I should have practiced a little more self-control in that situation, you're putting yourself back in the driver's seat, right? And we always want to have ownership and be in control of our decision making, right? We own the actions we take and the choices that we make. And that brings us a step closer to controlling our situation, right? So again, it's important to recognize and acknowledge my failure or my mistake, right? It's important to do that. I need to take ownership of my decision making, my actions, and it helps me to grow. I can't grow and improve if I don't acknowledge and recognize my mistake or my error or my failure, right? But here's the caveat. We don't want to recognize our failure to the point that we internalize our failure, right? And what do I mean by internalize? Internalize is when you incorporate your failure into your view of who you are. So instead of saying, I messed up, you say, I'm messed up. That's internalizing. You take that mistake or that failure and you make it part of who you are, part of your character. And we always want to avoid that. No, You are a human being who doesn't know everything and sometimes makes mistakes. That's just the fact of the matter. We have to accept that, and we have to understand that. I'm not perfect. I'm not a God. I'm a human being. I don't know everything there is to know, and sometimes I'm going to stumble. Sometimes I'm going to make mistakes. That's just the plain fact of the matter. But avoid making yourself become that mistake, right? And that is what we want to avoid. I go back to that biblical story that I mentioned in the last episode of that son who went out, took his inheritance, all the inheritance that his father gave him, and wasted it all, right? Big mistake, big failure, messed it all. It was a big disappointment. But when he finally came to his senses, as I said last time, and decided to go back home, this is what he said to his father. He said, I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. See, what he did is he internalized his mistake to the point that his mistake is what measured his worth, right? Because he went out there and blew all the money, he's not even worthy to be a son to his father. He ought to be just a hired servant. He internalized that. He incorporated his failure, his mistake, into his view of who he was. That's what we want to avoid. Did I make a mistake? Yes. Did I make a bad decision? Yes. But making a bad decision doesn't mean I'm a bad person. And we have to remember that and recognize that. You know, I'll end by saying, and this is kind of off topic, but actually I really think it rounds out, it may help you in dealing with that failure. The response of the father to the son in that story was just really touching. When his son said to him, I'm not worthy to be called your son, just make me a hired servant, the father just broke out into a big smile and told all the servants, go and get new clothes, get new shoes and put them on him. Go get the calf, the fatted calf, the best calf, and we're going to have a feast. We're going to have a party. We're going to have a celebration because this, my son, was dead and now he's alive. This, my son, was lost and now he's found. I thought that was really moving. And, you know, when I think of God, I don't know what your concept of God is, but when I think of God or that higher being, I think of someone who is in our corner. I think of someone who thinks the best of me and wants the best for me, even when I make mistakes. So remember that. Remember that. Again, our failures, recognize them, but don't internalize them. I made a mistake, but I am not that mistake. I made a bad choice, but I'm not a bad person, right? I'm a human being. I have faults, but I'm also a good person. So remember that. Don't let your failures discourage you to the point. Don't focus on them to the point that you internalize them. Now, I want you to join us in the next episode. Remember, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit that bell so you don't miss a video, because in the next video, we got another very special important point about turning your failures into fuel. We'll see you next time.